I will never forget the horror in everyone's eyes when Daniela stood up in the middle of the service and pointed at me. She is a witch. My mother-in-law practices witchcraft against our family. Her voice rang through the church walls. A deadly silence fell over the sanctuary. I felt every gaze like needles on my skin as Pastor Raphael froze at the pulpit. I had attended that place for 40 years, served with my hands, prayed with my heart. And in an instant, it all felt stained. A tremor started in my fingers and climbed my body, but I kept my head lifted. Something dark shone in my daughter-in-law's eyes, something that was not hers. In that moment I knew I was not fighting only a lie, but a far darker force that had chosen my family as its battleground. My name is Teresa Navarro, and prayer has been the first language of my life for as long as memory serves. I learned to kneel before the sun rose, to greet the day with words that steadied my hands and soothed the small anxieties that come with being human. My grandmother taught me to read scripture like a map for weathering storms. I kept those lessons as one keeps a lamp close to the bedside, easy to reach in the dark. Our house was built with doors that opened easily. We welcomed people who came with empty plates or heavy hearts. Food passed from our kitchen to a stranger's hands, and a blanket was offered without questions. Kindness, for me, was a daily discipline. I folded it into corners, I set it on the table. It was the way I understood what God had asked of me. My husband, Gabriel, was a quiet man with a generous heart. He spoke little, but his actions said enough. He would say, softly, that my prayers were an oil that eased what medicines could not. I believed him, and I believed in the steady rhythm of ordinary days: coffee at dawn, scripture read before breakfast, radio hymns while sweeping the floor. When my son Roberto married and brought Daniela into our lives 5 years ago, I opened my arms. I wanted family to grow like a garden, roots interlaced, tending one another. Daniela seemed gentle at first, careful in the way she placed a cup on the saucer, measured in her answers. She was quieter than I expected, but I gave her space, as any mother would. The baby changed everything, at least at first, in the way babies change everything: tiny hands, new laughter, the small demands of night feedings. Miguel arrived and the house softened to him. He was a child who liked to press his ear to the old wooden table and listen for secret sounds. He loved the Bible I had carried for decades and would trace the edges of its pages with a greedy, delighted finger. And then, slowly, the edges of our peace frayed. Small things at first. The Bible left on the floor one morning, pages fanned open to Revelation with smudged marks. I told myself it was an accident. We are a house of people with clumsy fingers. Still, that sight etched cold down my spine in a way I could not name. The small bottle of anointing oil I kept on the nightstand would vanish and reappear elsewhere beside the sugar jar, under a pile of laundry. Keys moved. A photograph would be upside down. No one would confess. The changes were minute, almost apologetic. But their pattern felt like a thread being pulled in a fabric that had once been whole. Night brought other things. I began to dream of corners where light could not reach. I would wake with a sense that someone had whispered my name, though the room was empty. Once, while making coffee, I felt a breath at my ear like a small bird's wing brushing the skin. I turned, certain someone stood behind me, only to find the kitchen empty and the sunlight slanting through the window. The air in certain rooms felt thicker, as if it held a weight that had nothing to do with dust or temperature. It pressed against my chest sometimes, a small, insistent pressure that made my prayers come in short, sharp sentences rather than long meditations. I would pray anyway. I always prayed anyway. The first time I noticed Daniela watching me differently, it was at dinner. Her gaze had a quality I could not place, like someone reading a map upside down. She muttered something to Roberto that made him glance my way with a new caution. During the short prayer before we ate, she did not bow her head. She looked at me instead, with an intensity that made my hands tremble slightly as I crossed them over my plate. I told myself I was being old-fashioned, overly sensitive. Who was I to read mystery into a look? But the nights grew heavier. Miguel began to wake screaming and say there was a dark woman who stood at the foot of his bed. He would point to empty air and shout until his small body shook. When I asked, Daniela would say, clipped and impatient, that children have nightmares. He is simply more sensitive, she told me once. Her voice carried more dismissiveness than comfort. A change in my husband was harder to miss. Gabriel, once bright-eyed at the sound of my voice, began to sleep with the television low and his hands cold. Fevers would come and go. Doctors found nothing concrete. We will monitor him, they said, scribbling notes that offered nothing to the hollowness growing in my chest. In a night when fever made him murmur, he squeezed my hand and said, in a voice thinned by pain, Teresa. There is something wrong in our house. It came with someone. These were the small fractures. They widened into a space where my instincts and my training as a woman of prayer pulled in opposite directions. On the one hand, the scripture said we should bear with one another, forgive freely, and never judge hastily. On the other, the old knowledge in me, the kind that smells like church incense and the leather of a family Bible, warned that some doors, once opened, allowed in things that were not easily dismissed. I began to look more closely at the rooms. I began to sweep with hands that felt like they had a higher calling than removing dust. One afternoon, while rearranging the guest room where Roberto and Daniela slept, I reached instinctively under the mattress and found a small parcel wrapped in black cloth. My hands, trained to give comfort, froze. Inside were things no grandmother expects to hold, strands of hair, and they were Gabriel's hair, a paper stained with something dark and smeared as if by a hand that wanted to hide its message, and little cloth dolls pierced by tiny pins. Each piece sat like a confession. My breath left me like someone had unplugged the warmth of the room. I carried the parcel downstairs as if carrying a sleeping child. The light in the kitchen was softer at that hour, the radio playing an old hymn that felt suddenly distant. I wrapped the parcel in a towel and placed it in my bag. I could not bring myself to scream, to scatter the neighbors with news. Instead, I put my hand on the Bible and said a prayer that felt like a stitch. That night, I heard footsteps in the hall around midnight. The house, which had once been a place of habitual creaks and comforts, now made noises that felt like messages. I walked out of my room and saw Daniela standing by the counter, her back to me, her lips moving in a language my ears did not know. The voice that came from her was thin and not wholly her own. She scattered salt in a small circle on the floor and whispered words that might have been a prayer, or might have been something else. She moved with a deliberateness that looked like ritual. The smell in the air shifted like old matches and herbs, sharp and strange. When she turned, her eyes were not the eyes I had greeted at family dinners. They felt like windows to a place where sorrow and fury had grown together. "Why are you awake?" she asked without surprise, as if she had expected to find me wandering the corridor. Her tone contained an edge I would not have expected from someone I had welcomed. "I could ask you the same," I said, and tried to keep my voice steady. "Why do you walk the house at this hour?" "Just getting a drink," she answered with a thin smile that did not reach whatever watched from behind her eyes. "You are always so suspicious. No wonder Roberto says you are peculiar." There was an odor sour and sharp that clung to the heels of her words. I thought of the parcel in my bag, of the hair, the dolls. In that instant I understood, in a way that bypassed thought, that this was not merely a family quarrel. It had the weight of something older and colder. The field of battle had moved inside the walls we had trusted to keep us safe. I did not tell my son then. The idea, he is a man who listens well between the lines, and when I told him, in halting sentences, about the parcel and the late-night rituals, he did not laugh. He did not scold me for suspicion. He asked questions and prayed, and then he helped me look into the past of my daughter-in-law. We discovered fragments. A woman in Daniela's childhood who spoke of protection and offerings. Sessions where a child was brought to be taught to sway with words she did not understand. It was an ugly patchwork that suggested a doorway left open long ago. The pastor said things that sounded very careful and very trained. A child taught that kind of language will often carry it into adulthood without knowing why. He said, "We must be gentle and resolute." Those words, gentle and resolute, became my mantra. I began fasting for 3 days, not as a drama but as a discipline. I went through the house with oil and prayer and held up the Bible and read aloud in rooms that had started to feel like strangers. I did not do this to show off. I did this to anchor ourselves back to the truth we had always held. Gabriel joined me in the small ways he could. On good days he would sit beside me in the morning light and say, "We fight for what we built." On bad days he would close his eyes and whisper prayers that sounded like a man remembering his father. We kept the ritual simple: scripture read before lunch, a short prayer at dusk, a hymn that my son could hum under his breath. One night I had a vision, not the kind that startles with thunder, but a quiet one that showed me Daniela as a child sitting in a corner, small and trembling while larger shadows moved above her. I heard a single, clear impression in my spirit: help her. She is bound where she once was offered. It came like a patient hand on the shoulder of my soul. The next morning the phone rang. It was Daniela. Her voice was thin and small. "Teresa," she said, "I need help. I am scared I will hurt Miguel." The words fell from her like rain through a torn roof. There were pauses, where she seemed to swallow shame or fear. "Roberto is not home," she whispered. "Will you come alone?" I could feel the ground shift under me in a way that was not both grave and hopeful. This was the opening I had prayed for, the thin place where a wound might be healed. I answered calmly, "Yes. I will come." Before I left, I knelt and prayed aloud in the doorway, words that felt like a brazen armor. "Lord," I said, "do not let me go as one who seeks vengeance. Let me go as one who seeks deliverance. Let my hands be steady, and let my words be your words." I tucked a small Bible into my bag and used a handkerchief to wrap the parcel. I moved like someone who had been given a mission that mattered more than my fear. I left the house that morning with the sky quiet as if the world itself watched. I remember the way the street smelled damp and honest. I repeated the pastor's phrase in my head: "Be gentle, be resolute." I did not know how I would act. I only knew that to fail to go would feel like turning my back on the one who needed rescue the most. Where there is prayer there is also preparation. I had learned that in the small rhythms of 50-some years of faith. I walked in, and the door closed behind me like an exhale. The apartment felt heavy in the way a room feels after a storm. Curtains were drawn. The air had an old match tang. A child's drawing lay on the table, scribbles like storm clouds. I set my bag down and listened for the shape of the house. Daniela opened the door and I saw the person she would become under the weight of all she had carried. She was thinner, like a plant that had tried to grow toward light and had been bent. She held herself like someone ashamed of her own hands. She told me about nightmares, about impulses that frightened her, about a voice that told her to keep secrets. My heart broke in a way that was both sorrow and resolve. I sat down and we began. I did not come to condemn. I came because my faith would not allow me to abandon what might yet be saved. We spoke in fragments, at first her memory in small accents and mine in small comforts. And then she changed, sometimes mid-sentence, with a voice that did not belong to her. The house shifted and something moved that could be felt as a cold draft though it was still summer. There was a moment when she cried out, and it was not only the voice of a woman but the voice of a long resentful presence. I spoke plainly then, in the name I had learned to use when things outside ourselves pressed upon us. In the name of Jesus Christ, spirit of deception, you have no authority here. My voice surprised me. It felt clear as a bell. The air tightened, and for a breath I understood the shape of what we faced. When Roberto returned hours later, he found us on our knees, hands joined and tears on our faces. The house had shifted, not into quiet victory but into a space of beginning. Roberto's eyes widened as he saw evidence of what I had found, as his confusion met the truth. He did not run. He did not hide. He had been naive, perhaps, but he stayed. I learned then that faith is not a single action. It is a long line of small and steady things. It is sitting up in the night and lighting a lamp. It is asking questions that are hard to ask. It is naming what you feel with words that expose the shape of the enemy without making the person who has hurt the enemy itself. We burned objects together and watched them blacken into ash in the quiet of the churchyard. The smoke lifted and seemed to carry with it an order. We blessed rooms and sang old hymns until our voices were rough. We held to the truth that the person who had caused harm was also a person who needed saving. The separation between sin and sinner became the work of love. Gentle and resolute. Where there is light, the dark withdraws. I learned to pray like someone who has done housework her whole life, methodical, persistent, humble in elbow grease and spirit. I ended that season exhausted and strangely lighter. Some things changed slowly, some things changed like dawn. Gabriel's fever began to recede. Miguel's drawings filled with color again. Daniela, in small measures, returned to herself as if waking from a long dream. The house remembered how to breathe. And still, there was a lesson that pressed. The battle had been fought not on an altar of power but in the ordinary rooms where meals are made and children sleep. The most dangerous wars are often fought behind curtains and under quiet roofs. The truest victories are not triumphs over people but rescues of souls. If you have stayed with me this far, thank you. This channel is new, and your presence matters. If this story moves you, please consider subscribing and leaving a comment with your city and country so we can build a circle of prayer across places. Every subscription helps this small voice reach 1,000 hearts. Thank you for listening and for walking with me. The rest of the story is not tidy. It is made of small recoveries and persistent work. I will tell it honestly. I will tell it in a way that honors the fragility of the human heart and the stubbornness of grace. The peace that returned to my home was not perfect. It was, instead, a careful repairing. There were nights I still woke with the taste of fear at the back of my throat. There were days when neighbors voiced suspicion and when good people whispered about the kind of woman who prays too much. I felt those whispers as cuts, but I let them be what they were and kept the work I had been given. In the quiet places, I practiced humility. I practiced steadfastness. I learned to discern without demonizing. I learned to love without enabling. And slowly, we found our rhythm again. The Bible on the shelf stopped being a stranger and became a lamp once more. Yet the memory of that parcel, the sound of unfamiliar words in the kitchen midnight, and the look in Daniela's eyes, the look that was not wholly hers, stayed with me. They became cautions and reminders. They taught me that holiness is a hands-on job. It taught me that to protect the ones we love we must be both tender and courageous. These are the small truths I carry now as I move through each day. They keep me awake and they keep me steady. They have taught me that sometimes the fiercest prayer is a patient one, and that sometimes the bravest thing is to keep loving when it would be easier to turn away. Life, you worry too much, he said once, a fatigue in his voice that sounded like a shield. His impatience was not entirely about me. It was about fear of losing the life he thought he had built. His words landed like a stone. I did not retaliate. Instead, I folded the hurt into prayer. I carried my quiet grievances like kindling. It seemed a small cost compared to what was at stake. Yet the household drama did what household dramas do, it spread. Neighbors asked questions at the gate and offered clumsy condolences. Some things are better left to doctors, they murmured, not realizing how often doctors had already been consulted. One neighbor, Maria, came over with a casserole and a sideways look. She meant well. She also meant to protect herself from the kind of story that made people uncomfortable. Micro-conflict number 1, when Roberto forbade me to see Miguel for a time, calling me overly spiritual, my heart closed in a way that felt like a small death. He told me that the church had been too harsh. He called me an extremist in a voice that shook. You and your visions, he said, and the word vision was like a blade. I sat with that wound and let it be a meditation. I prayed not to be defended by bitterness. I prayed to be patient. Every ounce of me wanted to call him into the room and show him the parcel, show him the evidence. But I had learned the hard lesson that proof rarely heals a heart, it could only widen it. So I waited and I prepared. A child, as we know, observes with a clarity that adults misname as fantasy. Miguel began to draw again, but his pictures had changed. He had been drawing brooks and birds, now his papers were filled with shapes that were cramped and black at the edges. One drawing showed a house with multiple doors, each door a different size. It was a child's attempt at articulating something he did not yet have words for. Michael asked me once, eyes serious in a way that made me feel older, "Grandma, why does the lady in my dream have no face?" I held his answer in my hands like a bowl and did not let it spill. "She is lost, Querido," I said. Lost things sometimes forget how to be kind. He accepted that answer with the faith of a child. Life builds on rituals. The ritual of tidying, the daily check of the stove, the prayer before bed, these became small defenses, like nails driven into a shaky fence. I began to place a rosary in a small dish by Miguel's bedside. It was not that rosaries are talismans, it was that meditation and rhythm, when shared, can be armor. I explained the rosary gently, deliberately, not as a weapon but as a promise. We are here. We are watching. We are praying. Micro-conflict number 2, there was a night when a neighbor's husband came over, concerned, and accused us of making too much fuss. He told Roberto that the church should not be meddling with what a family decides. Roberto, already stretched thin between doubt and defense, snapped. He asked the man to leave. The man left with heavy feet, muttering about fanatics. The conversation left a mark that I could not smooth with prayer alone. It fed a fear that our struggle would become gossip rather than rescue. In the midst of these ordinary battles, I introduced a small, seemingly banal object into the story, a simple envelope. I found it tucked between the pages of a magazine in the sitting room. At first I thought it was mail misplaced. The envelope was unremarkable, thin, edged in blue. Inside was a photograph folded in half and a scrap of paper with a few words scrawled in a hurried hand. The photograph, when I unfolded it, was of our family: Gabriel, Roberto, Miguel, and myself, taken months before. A small circle had been drawn around Gabriel in faint ink. The envelope's presence felt like a small declaration. Someone had been looking closely. Someone had kept a record. The scrap of paper had a name on it, a name I recognized from a whispered story the pastor had told me months before. It was an ordinary slip of paper with an ordinary name, but the meaning it held was not ordinary. It suggested that someone close enough to touch us had made notes in the margin of our lives. I placed the envelope in my Bible, where it would be private yet obvious. It sat there like a hinge. The envelope became a small talisman of suspicion. I did not parade it to anyone. I sat with it and let it make me more watchful. There is a peculiar quality in family conflicts where the human and the spiritual overlap. A word spoken in anger can be a seed that gives root to fear. A secret kept can become soil for something malign. I began to separate what belonged to people from what belonged to influences that were not human. This separation was not easy. To say, the person is not the same as the force controlling them, requires a tenderness that is both brave and heavy. Small signs emerged as if in code. A photograph of our family was moved from the mantel and placed face down on the floor one morning. A cup I had never seen in the house ended up on the shelf of the guest room. A neighbor's cat, who had always loved the sill by my kitchen window, refused to jump up there and instead sat and stared into space as if watching someone who could not be seen. These occurrences, slipping between the cracks of normal life, made a new kind of noise. I kept praying, but my prayers shifted. They became strategic as well as devotional. I learned to ask for clarity, for a small revealing, for the moment when what is hidden pulls back its veil. In those prayers I asked not for the destruction of a person but for the undoing of what had attached to them. I asked for a restoration that would carry consequences still. I asked for mercy. At the same time, I noticed Daniela's own conflict gnawing at her. She would come to the kitchen with hands shaking and confess small acts she could hardly recall. "I put this here," she would say, pointing at an object, then look as if she could not remember why. The shame in her eyes was an invitation to compassion. It was a reminder that beneath the actions that hurt us was a child once hurt. One afternoon, during a quiet hour when light came like forgiveness through the window, I found Roberto in his garden. He was digging with a tenderness that surprised me. He had always been clumsy with plants, too impatient. That day he was deliberate. He told me that he had been reading, and that something he read had shifted him. He said he realized he might have been protecting his pride more than his family. "I was afraid of being wrong," he said, throwing a small clump of earth from his hand. "Afraid of having believed in the wrong people. I should have listened sooner." His confession was small but true. It became the beginning of his willingness to watch instead of retreat. He started to be present at the edges of our prayer meetings. He began asking questions in ways that were less defensive, more curious. Curiosity, I have found, is a soft but powerful thing. There were nights when the house felt like a stage. Voices would rise and fall, sometimes in laughter, sometimes in argument. On one such night, the television played a story about families that endure public scandal. The actors on the screen moved carelessly through dialogue that felt eerily like our own. I remember thinking how life and fiction can mirror each other until you cannot tell where one ends and the other begins. A crucial moment came when Miguel, in a fit of drawing at the kitchen table, pushed a paper toward me with eyes like a child who knows he holds the truth. The drawing was of a small room with a bed and a circle drawn around it. There was a figure in the corner with a heavy black cloak. Beneath the picture, Miguel had written 2 words in clumsy letters, "No here." The clarity of a child's language can pierce grown defenses. I took the paper, folded it, and placed it in my Bible under the envelope. My hands did not shake. The room seemed to exhale. We began to hold small meetings in the home, few at first. Just Gabriel and the pastor and me sat around the table like conspirators for goodness. We did the practical things. We burned what was to be burned. We sealed windows with prayers and gentle declarations. We read aloud passages that had anchored our family for years. We made no spectacle. We made a slow and steady reclaiming. When I spoke to Daniela, I always looked for the child beneath the armor. I learned to approach her with soft There were moments of relapse nights when a presence seemed to return, a relapse in sleep patterns, an old posture resurfacing. But then there were also small, steady returns. Miguel's drawings brightened, Roberto's patience reappeared, Gabriel found his appetite again. Light returned in pieces. The final clue that pushed suspicion to certainty came on an evening when I found a small, worn notebook tucked beneath the cushion of the guest chair. Inside, in a handwriting that bent like a young vine, were notes, dates, names, small rituals written in shorthand. One page had my son's name, another had the name of a woman the pastor had once mentioned in passing. The notebook felt like a ledger of devotion and loss. Holding that little notebook, I felt a mix of sorrow and astonishment. To have the evidence is one thing, to recognize the tangled network of love and fear that produced it is another. The person who had committed the acts was not the only one responsible. There were histories and wounds and misread remedies. It was then that the suspicion settled into something more defined. We were not simply battling a distant darkness. We were facing a struggle that had been rooted in another family, passed like an heirloom from mother to child, and brought into our home. My reaction was not triumphal. I felt neither glee nor vengeance. I felt steadiness. I strengthened myself with prayer and with the small rituals of care. I spoke to Roberto in low, direct sentences. "We must do this carefully," I said. "We must reveal truth, but we must not shred the heart." He nodded. "I know," he said. "I know now." I was ashamed, and that made me blind. His tone held a regret that was not performative. It was true. And so we waited not for revenge but for an opportunity to bring the person into light, to separate the human from the force. The house, which had been a field of small battles, began to feel like a place where the work of healing could be done. The stakes remained high, and yet a new thing had happened. Suspicion had become clarity, and clarity had become purpose. There would be more nights of prayer, more small confrontations, and then a moment when what had been whispered in corners would be said aloud. We were readying ourselves for that moment. We stitched our resolve slowly. The family, though wounded, was assembling. The final image I will leave here is small and precise: the envelope in the Bible, the child's drawing, the notebook, and the hymn we sang under our breath. They are tokens of the ordinary human life that became the place of the extraordinary fight. The last line is a breath held. We had discovered the human through whom the darkness had entered, and the next step was no longer uncertain. We had found the thread. Now the work was to pull it with care. The church smelled of old hymnals and candle smoke that morning. The choir sang low and steady like a heartbeat. I sat between Gabriel and Roberto and felt the familiar press of worship settle around us. Mid-sermon, the pastor spoke of discernment and the armor of God. His words were calm, measured. They landed in my chest like a bell. Daniela shifted beside Roberto. Her hands clenched under her skirt. I felt the pulse at her throat like a hidden drum. The air around her seemed to tighten. Then she stood. It was sudden, as if someone had pushed a button. She rose like a thing answering a call. I saw the motion before I understood it. "She is a witch," she shouted. The sound cut the room open. Conversation stopped mid-breath. The organ stilled as if the pipes had frozen. Every eye turned toward me. Heat rushed to my face though the pew felt cool. My knees wanted to fold. I kept them steady. I prayed a short prayer in my head: "Lord, give me dignity." Roberto moved toward her, half disbelief, half instinct. The pastor put a hand up and asked for silence. His voice did not tremble. He had been our guide for decades. She practices witchcraft against our family, Daniela cried, pointing at me. Her face had gone thin, and I saw something like a film pass over her eyes. It was not her that pointed, it was something else using her as a hand. A man near the aisle whispered, "No." A woman gasped. The sound of pews shifting made the room louder than it had been for the hymn. My heart counted beats like a metronome. 1, 2, 1, 2. Roberto tried to pull Daniela down. He spoke to her as a man who did not want to see what his wife claimed. "Sit down, Danny," he said quietly. His voice had the edge of someone trying to keep the world together. She pushed his hand away as if from pain. "She stole my child," she said. The syllables were wrong, they had no logic. "She takes. She binds. She kills." Her voice fell into a register that I did not know and that did not belong to her. Pastor Raphael moved toward her with the slow patience of one who has seen storms and learned how to stand in them. He laid a hand on her shoulder and spoke steady words. "In the name of Jesus Christ, spirit of division and deception, we ask you to reveal yourself," he declared. When he invoked that name, the air in the church seemed to shift. The light through the stained glass looked sharper. The little dust motes in the sunbeam seemed to run like quick fish. I felt my own breath deepen. What came out of her mouth was not the pleading of a woman but the rolling hiss of someone stepping out from a cave. The voice that answered the pastor's command spoke as if reading from a ledger. "She is mine," it said. "She fed me. She promised me offerings. She bound the family in exchange for favor." The pews vibrated with a dozen reactions at once: shock, denial, a soft prayer. Pastor Raphael's face did not change, but I heard the prayer tighten in his jaw. He asked simple questions. He asked them like one pruning a vine. "When did you enter her?" he asked. "Since she was small," the voice breathed. "In the sessions. When the father struck and the mother turned away. I sat on her shoulder as comfort. I promised things." The confession spilled out like water from a cracked pipe. It named a story I had only guessed at in fragments. Gabriel stood slowly and walked down the aisle toward us. He was thin with fever but his voice was firm. "Pastor," he said, "I found things in our guest room. Offerings. Dolls. Hair. Things that do not belong in a Christian home." My hands went to my bag. I had wrapped the package in a towel that morning and taken it with me because my prayer would not let it sit neglected. My fingers trembled as I brought it out and set it on the pulpit like a small accusation of truth. The pastor examined the cloth, lifted the strands, read the sticky paper. His eyes moved from the evidence to me and then to the congregation. He spoke with slow gravity. "This is a work of binding and witchcraft," he said. "Not cast by your mother, but cast against her, against them." A murmur like wind rustled the congregation. Some faces softened, others hardened. The word "against" landed differently in each heart. For some it was exoneration. For others, it was a new question: who had the power and why? I looked at Daniela. Between the sound and the shapes, I saw a child trembling. I saw a woman who had been taught the wrong prayers. Behind the accusing voice, I saw wounds that had been misread as strength. We had all come to church for solace. Instead, we were watching a wound open. People spoke in fragments, some prayed aloud, others stared. Roberto's face crumbled and then set like wet concrete. His disbelief fought with a dawning suspicion. "You have to leave," he told her later outside, voice raw. This public humiliation. "You cannot," he could not finish. I watched his hands make helpless fists. Micro-conflict, the church, a place of refuge, fractured into camps. Some whispered that this was, "You know how people talk," she said, as if warning me about a coming rain. Her casserole was warm. Her eyes were cold. I tried to keep the house as it had been. I read morning scripture aloud. I poured oil on the doorframes. I lit a small candle in the living room and watched it burn steady as a promise. At night, sleep did not come. I woke to the creak of floorboards, to the sound of a child shifting in a bed down the hall. Once, I walked into the guest room and found a photograph face down on the floor. My family's faces looked small in the glossy frieze of film. A faint circle had been drawn around Gabriel in the photograph. The ink had bled like a bruise. The evidence mounted like a slow tide. The more I tried to insist upon charity, the more the world seemed to demand proof. A neighbor came to our gate and spoke with a voice that tried for gentleness and fell short. "Perhaps you should let doctors handle this, Teresa," he said. "The church can offer counsel, but sometimes the mind needs a different kind of care." That was another knife. I honored the need for medicine. I had visited doctors for Gabriel. No one had found a physical cause. But the suggestion that spiritual matters were signs of mental illness cut into the soft underbelly of family loyalty. I walked to the church again to speak with Raphael. He met me at the door with both hands open. He had the look of a man who had watched a storm and set his jaw for the work ahead. "We must be wise and careful," he said. "There is evil in the world that uses people like a hand uses a tool. We are to be tender with the hand and relentless with the force." Those words became a lifeline. Tender and relentless. In my head I repeated them until they were like a rhythm under my feet. That evening, I sat with Gabriel and showed him the photograph, the paper, the package. His eyes darkened not with fever but with recognition, like someone seeing the pattern in a fabric he had worn for years and suddenly noticing the tear. "I always thought the fever was enough to explain it," he murmured. "But this is different." He reached for my hand. His fingers were still, and I felt the old warmth that had held me through small illnesses and harder seasons. We began to plan small defenses. Not for spectacle, but for home. We locked the guest room closet. We cleared out old boxes and burned what we could safely burn at the edge of the yard. We spoke scripture aloud in rooms that had become quiet. We set the Bible on the highest shelf and placed a rosary in Miguel's small hands when he visited. The town watched. I could feel it in the way people greeted us with that extra blink of caution. Some came to pray. Some came to whisper. A few turned away. Love is thin in a small town when scandal whispers. I found my resolve in the small things. I would not flinch from evidence. I would not be cruel to a woman who had been so hurt she could not distinguish fear from power. A small voice inside me asked a hard question. What would I do if the one who held the force was family? The thought came like a cold draft. I folded it into prayer and held it there. That night, as I knelt, I asked not for victory to be loud but for truth to be clear. I did not want shame to fall like ash on a house. I wanted healing, even if the path to it was jagged. A man in the congregation had taped a short note to our church door. "We stand with the truth." Beneath it, an anonymous scribble, "But be gentle." The 2 lines summed up the choice before me. Be gentle. Be resolute. At the edge of sleep, I felt the world on the hinge. The revelation had been made. The next step would be to move with care. The next step would cost something. The package sat on the table like a challenge. I closed my eyes and asked for the courage to carry what must be carried. Then I opened them and made a slow plan. I would not rush to condemn. I would not hide the facts. I would listen. I would prepare. The question now was not if I had been accused, but how I would answer in a way that honored truth and saved a soul. The time for action was coming. The next move would be mine. The weeks that followed felt like living in a drawing where the colors had been soaked out. Days were practical chores and quiet prayers. Nights were long and heavy as wet cloth. People spoke in halves. Family alliances hardened like bread left too long on the counter. Roberto alternated between visiting and retreating, his face a map of confusion. He forbade me from seeing Miguel for a time, saying I worried him. His words were not cruel, but they were a lock. "You worry too much," he said once, and the phrase landed like a small stone in the glass bowl of my day. I did not argue. I folded the herd into prayer. I walked the rooms and said a quiet blessing on the toys Miguel had left behind. I left a note tucked in his jacket pocket, a small love letter across distance. The not allowed settled around me like snow. The house itself grew cautious. A curtain moved though the air was still. A cold place lay on the floor in the corner of the kitchen like a sleep left unfinished. My Bible sometimes smelled faintly of something like burnt sugar, though I had not lit anything. Gabriel's fevers returned in uneven waves. Doctors ran tests and found nothing conclusive. They shrugged with the uneasy face of men who could not name the shadow. Perhaps post-viral, one suggested. Another said, stress can do strange things. They offered pills and recommendations and a referral to a counselor. I took the pills because husband asked me to, and I prayed because my hands knew no other work. Prayer was the first action of my day, and now it became the thread I pulled through the dark. One night, I woke to find Gabriel standing at the window, light from the street haloing his silent form. He turned when he felt me and smiled as if at something small and private. "We must be patient," he said, voice raw. "We must not make enemies of those we love." Those words were both tender and a plea. I held them like a stone in my pocket. I began a practice of vigilance. Not the sharp, fearful watching of a person full of accusation, but a steady, careful attention that looked for detail and remembered mercy. I checked doors. I blessed corners. I left salt at thresholds not as superstition but as a sign. Salt is a reminder of covenant to me. The pastor stopped by with his Bible and a quiet steadiness. We sat at my table and spoke in half sentences at first. Then he spoke plainly. "A child raised in certain rituals often carries them as a way to live," he said. "We must address both the spirit and the history. The person is loved, the pattern must be broken." He suggested counseling, not as an end, but as a bridge. He recommended tests for Gabriel again and asked for patience with Roberto. He did not promise a neat fix. He promised companionship. I took to fasting for 3 days. Food fell away from me as if it had been heavy chain. Prayer became a long, thin song. My knees thickened with hours of kneeling. I read scripture aloud in every room and let the words roll like water over the wood. During those days, I had a vision not dramatic, but clear as a bell. I saw a little girl crouched under a blanket in a dark room while figures moved above her. A small hand reached out for light and missed it. The impression was simple: help her. Bound since she was little. I woke with my throat tight and the taste of iron in my mouth. That night my phone rang. It was Daniela. Her voice was tiny like paper being creased. "Teresa," she said. "I am afraid I will hurt Miguel. Please. Come. He is alone. Roberto is not here." My heart both opened and closed. The opening felt like the grace I had asked for, the closing felt like a trap. For days I had prayed for a clear door. Here it was, thin and trembling. "Yes," I answered. "I will come." The words that came were not mine alone. They were the language of a woman who had spent a lifetime learning which phrases could hold back night. For hours we spoke and prayed. Daniela alternated between confession and fury, collapsing into apologies and then rising with fingers that tried to push away the world. She admitted to having placed things in our home, small things meant to sway and to hold threads and scraps, little offerings given meaning by someone else. "I wanted to feel safe," she whispered. "I wanted to keep him. I thought if she was appeased, he would stay." The depth of that fear was a revelation. Jealousy and the desire to hold love had been shaped into chains. I saw then that the enemy had worked through what she had learned to reach into the family. I could have shouted condemnation. Instead I sat and wept with her. Tears do not fix everything, but they bend steel. At one point she screamed, and from her mouth came words that were not language but pressure. It was like forcing a window open with breath. It frightened Miguel into the far corner. I scooped him up and told him a story about a bright place until his breathing settled. Roberto came home later that evening. There was a tense hour when he listened, angry and ashamed in equal measure. He had been hurt by the spectacle in the church, and now he was confronted with the private truth. He paced and then sat and put his head in his hands as if he had been given a weight he had not owned. "I am sorry," Daniela said to him, small and raw. "I did it. I asked for protection. I gave things. I was stupid and scared." Roberto's face broke. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked. The question was simple, and it held 1,000 fears. "I was afraid you would leave," she said. "I thought if I could make you need me, you would stay." That confession hung between them. It was a human wound. It spoke of need disguised as control. The pastor recommended that Daniela give up the objects and submit to prayer and counseling. She agreed reluctantly. She gave over boxes of frayed cloths, tiny bottles, and a small book with shorthand notes. We burned them in the churchyard, watching the smoke lift as if untying knots. Even as the smoke rose, however, the damage had a shape. Trust is not a thing that can be burnt and then immediately rebuilt. It takes stitches and time and honest work. I forgave her in my heart then, not perfectly, but with a decision to love her as a woman who had been hurt. Gabriel, with a patience that had been forged in battles of his own, placed a hand on her shoulder and said, simply, "We will get through this." Micro-conflict. Some in town insisted we had been naive, others claimed we had acted too harshly in public. People who favored public image over messy grace criticized us for exposing the family. Their murmurs were like winter, cold and persistent. Sleep came slowly that night. I lay awake thinking of the little girl I had seen in my vision. I thought of how children are sometimes offered into darkness as if protection. The thought made my mouth taste of iron. I prayed until the early hours. My prayer was both a shield and a plow. I did not ask for simple things. I asked for recovery of bodies, of hearts, of truth. When dawn came, the light in the kitchen tasted different. It was not a triumph. It was a beginning. The house breathed in. The edge of the night had passed, but I knew the work would continue. I had learned a hard thing, to fight not with hate but with fierce affection. To set boundaries and to open a path. The pain would not be erased. The threads would have to be rewoven. The battle had cost us privacy and comfort. It had also opened a door for healing. My hands ached from prayer and from the small labors of proof burning, cleaning, standing. Yet a strange lightness settled like dust when finally the smoke cleared. I knew then the next steps would be hard: counseling for Daniela, therapy for the family, slow rebuilding of trust. But under all that, a steadiness had settled into me. The darkness had shown us its shape. We had seen who it used. Now the living work of repair would begin. The night had been heavy. The dawn promised a plan. I rose to meet it with the prayer that had become my constant companion: Lord, give us patience. Give us courage. Give us love that does not fail. And somewhere, in the quiet, I felt a small confirmation, like a hand on the shoulder of a traveler. The next move would come, and when it did, we would meet it with truth. Pastor Raphael sat across from me at my small kitchen table and leaned his palms on the wood. His presence was steady as a rocking chair. He had listened and he had not judged. We must be methodical, he said. There are spiritual steps and practical ones. Together, they will be our compass. I nodded. Method was a comfort. I had spent a life doing the same small things: prayer, cleaning, little kindnesses. Now I would apply method to spirit, as if folding a sheet precisely. We began by mapping the history. Raphael spoke with a quiet urgency. Tell me again about her mother, he urged. He probed for details without prying. He wanted facts that could reveal patterns. From parish connections we unearthed scraps. A woman in a neighboring town remembered a spiritualist who visited the family when Daniela was small. A former neighbor spoke of nights where candles were lit for reasons never explained to outsiders. These were not judgmental tales, but pieces of a puzzle. Children are like open doors, the pastor said. If someone places a hinge in that doorway, it can swing for years. We decided to pursue 3 tracks at once. First, spiritual cleansing of the home. Second, pastoral counseling for Daniela. Third, medical and psychological support for Gabriel and for the family system. We would not gamble on a single remedy. At home, I began a quiet program of consecration. It was not theatrical. It was a slow, steady reclaiming. I walked each room with my Bible, reading aloud psalms that tasted of protection. I anointed the door frames with oil and whispered the same blessing on each window latch. The air changed, almost imperceptibly. Light fell differently through curtains. A weight that had sat in the corners felt less dense. It was a small lift, like someone opening a window slightly on a stuffy day. Where there was doubt, I practiced words of faith. We claim this house for love, I would say softly. We claim this house for truth. The phrases became like stitches. Where there is light, the dark retreats, I told myself as often as I said it aloud. We organized the burning of objects carefully. We did it in the churchyard after a short prayer. The congregation came in stalls, some to watch, some to help, some only to witness. We placed each item on the small flat stone and let it burn. The scent of burning paper and cloth rose and dispersed, and with it a certain visible sorrow lifted. But ritual alone was not enough. Raphael encouraged discernment in the personal sphere as well. He warned us about conflating the woman with the force. We confront the spirit, he reminded me. We hold tender the person. This distinction became my work. The force that had been named in the church was cruel. The person who carried it was wounded. To treat them as one and the same would be to damage what we hope to heal. At the same time, I gathered information with the careful relentlessness of a housewife who learns to keep records. I found a small photograph folded in the back of a magazine in the sitting room. On the back a name was written in a hurried hand, the name of a woman a pastor had once mentioned. An envelope with a scrap of handwriting sat in my Bible. Each item felt like a mute witness. I shared what I found with the pastor and with Gabriel. We must be honest, I told them. We must not hide facts because they are ugly. Gabriel, for his part, grew steadier. The fevers came less often. His speech gained a clarity that made my hands. I practiced spoken prayers like surgical instruments, clear, short, precise. The language was simple: free, forgive, bind, loose. The risk, however, remained. If we were wrong, we would break a marriage. If we were right, we would save a child and a husband and perhaps a soul. The weight of potential harm rested on every footstep. At the edge of our plan, Daniela called again. The fear in her voice had changed to a kind of pleading. "They are watching," she said. "I feel eyes." The woman, she said, I would lose everything if I left. I could feel the terror there. A voice binding another with fear is a kind of theft. We were to right that theft. On a clear afternoon, Raphael and I and 2 elders drove to the small town where the woman had once lived. The car hummed. My hands gripped the handle until they ached. I practiced my prayers quietly in the car, as one might rehearse a speech. We found the house by description and by scent of old wood. It sat at the end of a lane with a sagging fence. The front door was painted a tired blue. Curtains hung like tired lashes over the windows. An old woman answered the door. Her face was a map of winters, and when she saw Raphael she hesitated and then stepped back. We explained who we were and why we had come. She let us in, though her house was small and smelled of herbs and something mineral. Inside, the rooms were layered with objects: bottles, jars, scraps of paper. The air tasted of dried flowers and old coals. It was not an evil place in the theatrical sense, but it carried a long memory like an attic full of folded things. The woman, her name was spoken with a rasp of caution, had a manner that was both defensive and weary. When asked about Daniela, she folded her hands hard and denied knowing anything. Then, in the quiet, she admitted to giving help and to collecting tokens people left her. Protection, she called it. Guidance. Raphael asked gentle questions about dedication, about ceremonies, about promises made on a child's behalf. The woman grew tight. I did what the mother asked, she said. It was a help for survival. For many, it was a life saved. I felt both anger and sorrow in that room. Anger for the child given into someone's hands without consent. Sorrow for a woman who had made a trade and then carried it like a cinder. We asked about papers and notes. She produced a small book, edges worn, ink faded. Inside were names and dates and little shorthand. On one page a name circled with an ink like dried blood. Alongside it, instructions, small, specific, ritual signs. I traced the letters with a finger that shook. We will need copies of this, Raphael said. He spoke with the voice of a legal man. This will help us understand what was done. The woman agreed to let us photograph the pages. She asked in return that we promise not to destroy her home. We promised, but the silent bargain felt like another fracture. Back in the car, the evidence lay in our hands like a small, cold thing. We could now show a chain, sessions where a vulnerable child had been told to give small pieces, a ledger tracking names, a pattern that explained how a force had been invited and then passed along. This discovery did not feel like victory. It felt like finding an old wound and finally getting to examine it. To know is not to have healed. When we returned, the pastor and I set the ledger on the table and spoke. This gives us a place to stand, he said. It is evidence that helps us act wisely. He drafted a plan: bring Daniela into a safe setting, read and renounce the rituals aloud, have witnesses, involve a counselor, and follow with a series of prayers and community support. We would not do this as a spectacle. We would do this as a rescue. The night before the work, I could not sleep. I knelt and prayed with the Bible open on my lap. I read verses that spoke of deliverance and of tender mercy. The words knit a net under my feet. Do not fear, I whispered to myself as much as to any presence I believed might be listening. We go with love and truth. At dawn, I packed a small bag, oil, my grandmother's worn prayer cloth, the ledger's photocopies, and a small child's toy for Miguel. Love, plans, and witness. The pastor arrived quietly. Roberto stayed away at first, unsure. Gabriel came with a slow, steady step. As we drove, my hands folded and refolded. The road felt like a seam to be stitched. I prayed for courage. I prayed for honesty. I prayed for the small heart at the center of the storm. We were stepping toward a place where a human had been used as a vessel. We were stepping toward a reckoning that would require both mercy and justice. The car slowed at the turn where the world seems to hold its breath. Ahead, the next chapter of this battle awaited. We had a plan. We had witnesses. We had evidence. We had the authority of prayer. What would happen when we called the thing out of hiding? Would light be enough to untie years of bindings? I thought of the little girl shivering under a blanket and felt the shape of resolve form in my chest. We had prepared. Now we would act. The apartment door closed behind me with a sound that felt too loud. The hall smelled of old coffee and something bitter I could not name. My palms were slick with oil from the small bottle in my pocket. The living room was dim. Curtains were drawn like book covers. A single lamp made a pool of orange on the table. Daniela sat on the couch, hands clasped as if trying to hold herself together. Miguel played with a wooden train on the floor, moving it in slow circles. He did not look up. Her voice when it came was small and raw. I am so tired, she said. I cannot keep this up. I sat across from her and let the silence be a kind of room. I would not rush her. That had never been my way. Prayer taught me patience as much as power. You are not alone, I said. I am here. God is here. Speak to me truthfully. She met my eyes and then looked away. Tears cut clean paths down her cheeks. I was a child, she whispered. They told me I must give pieces of others to hold power. I did not know what I gave. Her confession arrived like a slow theft. It disclosed more than words. It revealed places in her life that had been hollowed out and filled with fear. I reached into my bag and drew out the photocopies of the ledger we had found at the woman's house. I laid the pages on the table like evidence and like a map. Daniela flinched. I thought it was protection, she said. It started as protection. Then it became holding. Then it became necessary. Her hands trembled. The tremor seemed to originate below the ribs and climb outward. I could hear her breathing as if through a narrow tube. I picked up the small cross I always carried and set it between us. Its weight was small. Its meaning was not. Listen to me, I said quietly. I speak to the force that has used you. I speak to the part that is not you. In the name of Jesus, you have no claim here. The air shifted as if someone had opened a door in the room. A draft slid through the crack of the window and cooled the sweat on my neck. Miguel's train stopped moving. Daniela's voice changed. It became flat and distant. She gave me names, the voice said. She bound them with salt and shadow. She said I would keep him if I obeyed. My heart tightened. I had heard such things before in prayerful hearings, but hearing them come from her mouth even when part of her was not speaking made the gravity real. Teresa, she said at one moment, her own voice returning like sunlight, I put things in your house. I thought if I could make you small, they would turn to me. There was an ache in that admission that cut through every other emotion. Shame tastes like iron in the mouth. You have no authority over this family. You have no claim over this child. You are not welcome. Go where you belong to silence. The room seemed to contract at the command, as if someone had pulled a blind closed inside the air. My knees were steady. My hands did not tremble. A sudden, high whine rose from the pipes in the wall. The light over the table flickered. Miguel looked up, eyes wide, gripping his train like a lifeline. I moved closer to Daniela and placed my hands over her head. I prayed aloud. The words were simple. Bind. Loose. Renounce. Cover. Release. By the blood of Christ, be sealed in freedom, I said. Let truth be the rope that binds, not fear. Let mercy unmake this exchange. Her body shook once, hard, like a branch in wind. She gasped and then was still. Her forehead became wet with sweat. When she opened her eyes, they were clearer, but the shadows had not fully left. Roberto arrived shortly after, as if summoned by the faint alarm of a mother's heart. He stood in the doorway, face closed and raw. For a moment he did not see me. He saw only the state of his wife. What is happening? He demanded, voice pitched between anger and fear. What have you done to her? He took in the oil, the cross, the ledger. His hand found the photocopies and trembled. You accused her, he said to me, the word heavy with years of their marriage. At the church. Now this. I met him without flinch. His accusation was a shield. His fear sharpened it. She asked for help, I answered. She asked to be freed. Roberto's jaw worked. I thought you were wrong. I thought we should go to doctors. I thought that faith is always loud, I said softly. That prayer is a spectacle. I know. I have seen men close the door when the light gets uncomfortable. He looked at Daniela, at the ledger, at the small heap of objects she had brought from an old box. There were packages of thread, frayed bits of cloth, a bottle with a dark residue. His hands shook. The air tasted metallic then, a pressure building between the three of us. I could feel the spiritual line between person and force like a taut wire. She gave them pieces of our lives, Daniela whispered. She said it was to keep us. I thought it would hold him here. Roberto's face crumpled. Why didn't you tell me? He said, not waiting for the answer. Because I was taught that secrets keep families, she said. Because I was afraid of losing what little I had learned to hold. Grief and fury stacked inside him like books on a table about to collapse. He looked at me and then away as if weighing whether to blame me or to take the blame inward. You could have come to us, he said finally. You could have let us share the risk. Instead you hid our lives away in cloth and threads. There was accusation in that sentence and also a plea that broke him open. I understood both sides. I had been both the shelter and the one who sometimes covered pain with prayer alone. I did not answer his recrimination with an argument. I set my hand on his shoulder and let him have his storm. Storms need to blow through a house before it can clear. Forgiveness will not be an instant, I said. But we will act with truth. We will not hide what has been done. We will unmake it with light and with care. He laughed once, a sound without humor. And how do we do that? Burn trinkets and say prayers? Yes, I answered. And more. We find the roots. We name them. We bring counsel. We choose mercy over spectacle. Roberto looked at me with a new kind of hunger. And what will you do about Miguel? He asked. If she did anything in his room, he did not walk into power, I said fiercely. He did not consent. We will protect him. We will heal him. We will not let fear become a new idol. That night we sat in the dim room and planned like soldiers who fight without guns. We wrote names. We made calls. We prayed in measured breaths. We did not shout or show off. We prepared. Where there is light, the dark retreats, I whispered at one point, the sentence not planned but true. The room repeated it back to me like an answer. The confrontation had not ended in spectacle. It had ended in work. The enemy had been named. The human heart that had carried the enemy had been seen. But seeing is not the same as repairing. The next step would be both spiritual and practical. And as I left that night, I felt the shape of the task, patient, steady, and demanding a tenderness that could hold both truth and mercy. We had called the darkness by name. Now we would have to unbind it, stitch the family, and teach new ways to keep love that are not bargains with fear. I closed the apartment door behind me and felt, for a moment, the warmth of a small answer in my bones. It was not victory yet. It was the beginning of a long untying. The days after the confrontation were dense with small labors. We moved like careful workmen restoring a house after a storm. No sudden gestures. No slogans. Only steady hands and persistent light. First we cataloged. Paper. Cloth. Bottles. Names. Dates. Each item was a footprint. Each notation in the ledger was a map to follow. Raphael met with us and took notes. He listened as a man who had learned to measure both faith and human fragility. We decided together on a course: witness, renunciation, counseling, and community support. I would not let shame hide anything. Shame is a quiet accomplice of darkness. We prepared a time to renounce aloud the acts recorded in the ledger. Witnesses would be present, but not as a spectacle. They came as companions. 2 elders, a counselor, Raphael, and Gabriel when his strength permitted. The night of the renunciation we gathered in the churchyard. The moon was a thin coin. A small fire was built in a shallow pit on the stone. We stacked the objects one by one. Each item added a small sound, the soft crackle of thread surrendering to flame. Daniela stood with us, hands pale but steady. She had not yet learned how to look at the congregation without the weight of a ledger in her chest. That night she had a new courage that was not theatrical. It was the kind that comes after one has been seen and chooses to be exposed. Do you renounce these works? Raphael asked, the words plain as bread. I renounce them, she said. I renounce what I was taught. I renounce the promises I made in darkness. She spoke slowly. Each word came from a throat that had swallowed shame for years. There were tears. There were small cries. There were also sharp, honest apologies to people she loved. We lit the matches. The items burned and the smoke rose thin and honest to the sky. The scent was not mystical. It was the smell of things finally allowed to be what they were. Ash. Loss. Release. After the burning we returned to the sanctuary and sat in the empty pews, the wood catching the embers of moonlight. We spoke of boundaries. We spoke of counseling. We spoke of restitution in small practical ways: therapy sessions, family time, and safe spaces for Miguel. Forgiveness is redemptive, Raphael said. But it is not an eraser. It is a way to transform what was given into something honest. There was work to do with Roberto. He had been wounded. Love had been used against him, and he had to find a new stance that neither rejected his wife nor swallowed the harm done. Our conversations were quiet. He would not be rushed into a sermon of reconciliation. Words are one thing. Repeated action is another. Daniela offered public testimony one Sunday. Standing before the congregation, she told her story with humility, not as a confession to be punished but as a testimony of rescue. Her voice wavered, then strengthened. I was broken and used, she said. But through love and truth I found a way back. I ask for patience. I ask for grace. And I want to help others. Her words were not a performance. They were a summons. People wept. Some forgave immediately. Some took longer. Many came to the counseling group she later led. I watched her grow cautious, not brittle. She learned to accept help. She learned that protection can be healthy without being a chain. At home, we made a small altar of healing, not of the old trade, but of recovery. It held a small Bible, a bowl of water, a folded prayer cloth, and a toy. It was not an altar to power. It was a table to remember the price we had paid and the promise we had chosen. We also repaired the places where trust had been frayed. Roberto and Daniela went to couples therapy. They spoke of fear and of the ways insecurity had been weaponized. They learned new practices, to name needs aloud, to ask for help without making bargains, to sit with silence instead of filling it with rituals. Trust is sown, Roberto said once, threading a needle with a fumbled hand. It is stitched slowly. It will fray sometimes. But we can learn to stitch more carefully. I found my own heart changed in small ways. I had been tested. I had prayed nights until my knees hurt. I had used words of rebuke against a force and arms of mercy towards a person. Those acts had altered me. I had always believed that authority comes with gentleness. Now I understood more deeply that gentleness can be fierce. To hold someone while binding what harms them requires both strength and tenderness. We continued to do the slow work. Counseling sessions were weekly. Raphael visited often enough to keep us grounded. The pastor from the woman's town agreed to meet with us to talk through the ledger and to help unpick patterns that reached further than just our family. There were nights when old fears returned. A photo misplaced here. A comment overheard there. Old ghosts can be tenacious. When they returned, we met them with testimony and with ritual that bore meaning: prayer with witnesses, a bowl of blessed water, a promise spoken aloud. Faith is not loud, I kept thinking. Faith is steady hands. Time is not a cure, but it is a context. In weeks and months small changes accumulated. Small habits rearranged the house of the heart. Miguel slept without waking to call for the woman. Gabriel began to make plans again, small ones, a visit to the market, an evening walk. The congregation slowly changed too. Where there had been judgment, there was now an awkwardness that softened into curiosity and then care. People who had once mocked came with casseroles and offered rides to appointments. The church learned to hold complexity. One evening, long after the initial fire, Daniela came to me with a box. Inside were pages she had written in a trembling hand. They were prayers she had made up when she was a child, a mixture of fear and hope. She wanted to give them to the church library. "This is the child I used to be," she said. "I want her back." "You already have her back," I told her. "But she will be new. She will learn different words for the same longings." We built a group for those who had been involved with spiritualist practices and those recovering from them. Daniela led the first meeting, hands steady, voice clear. People shared stories they had never spoken aloud before. There was no spectacle, only mutual work. The most profound moment came some months later when Miguel drew a picture and wrote beneath it, in uneven letters, "Home safe." He stuck the paper on the fridge with a magnet shaped like a sun. I stood in the kitchen and watched that paper like one might watch a proof of a lesson learned. The paper did not erase the ledger or the months of fear. But it did mark a move toward a different kind of life. I had been given a hard grace. It had cost privacy. It had cost the fragile peace of not being questioned. But it had given us an honest life. When Daniela finally asked my forgiveness in a quiet afternoon, her voice broke and then steadied. Her apology was not theatrical. It was sincere, full of memory and regret and the rawness of someone who had been freed and now had to learn to live free. "Forgive me," she said, "for all the things I did." I took her hands and we did what had to be done in small human ways. We spoke truth, we set boundaries, and then we forgave. Forgiveness did not mean forgetting. It meant choosing a new path. They did not become perfect. None of us did. But the house became lighter. Laughter returned in measured doses. The train still rolled on the floor, now as a toy and not as a reminder. I learned that deliverance is not a single moment but a long series of ordinary choices. The day-to-day acts of love, truth, and repair add up. They build a home that can withstand storms. And in the quiet mornings, when sunlight poured through the kitchen window and the kettles sang, I would kneel and pray with gratitude and with caution. I had seen how fragile hearts are, how easily fear can be handed down, and how decisively love can heal when it holds firm. Where there had been a ledger and a fire, there were now lists of appointments, counseling sessions, and a small community group calendar. Practical work became spiritual practice. The two were not separate. At night, sometimes, I would think of the woman who had taught Daniela. I prayed for her too. Not out of naivety, but because she too was a human who had once been a child. We walked forward slowly, stitched by steady deeds. The light had not conquered everything, but it had taken ground. And that ground would be tended for a long time. Now, sitting at my kitchen table, I see the arc of what we lived through and what we are still learning to hold. The battle was never simply between people. It was a battle for a heart, and the heart needed hands more than judgment. The lesson that remains with me is simple and stubborn. Love is not naive. Love is not soft in the sense of being without limits. Love names truth, sets boundaries, and then offers mercy. Love is authority wrapped in tenderness. I learned that the enemy often comes through small bargains. A promise made in fear can become a chain. A child asked to barter pieces of another person's life will not necessarily understand the cost. We must name those bargains and teach different currencies: honesty, trust, steady presence. Forgiveness is not a free fall. It is an intentional climb. We forgive when we have seen the pattern, when the truth is known, and when repair can be attempted with real accountability. That is not weakness. That is stewardship. If you are watching and thinking, "What would I do?" remember this: authority without mercy breaks. Mercy without authority lets harm repeat. The work is to hold both together. A final truth: the light does not need to shout. It needs to live. It needs ordinary practices: prayers at the table, days of rest, honest conversations, therapy, ritual renunciation when necessary, and the courage to face what we have hidden. If this story touches you, please stay with it. Tell me where you are watching from in the comments. Share a moment when you chose mercy over hate or when you stood firm in love. And if you want to help this little channel grow, please subscribe. Your presence makes this work possible. I do not close with triumph. I close with an invitation. Look at the person who seems your enemy. Ask, could this be someone who needs the light you have been given? The answer may change the way you pray, the way you act, and the way you love. Where there is light, begin. Where there is shadow, bring steady hands.